about religion and politics. I think it's been striking, and Jim and I haven't talked about this, so I don't even know whether he agrees with me on this or not. But it is striking that religious themes, explicit and implicit, have played far less of a role in this election than they have they had in 2008 or in 2004. Now, some of that is not surprising. That we have had a big economic downturn and economic issues loom very large for almost everybody, regardless of their views on social or religious issues. And this has happened before. The 1928 election between Al Smith and Herbert Hoover was very much a cultural and religious war about whether we should continue the prohibition of alcohol and whether we should elect Al Smith as the first Catholic president of the United States. We voted for Hoover, thereby continuing with prohibition for another 4 years and rejecting the first Catholic president. But a funny thing happened on the road to 1932, and it's the Great Crash and followed by the Great Depression. And suddenly all of these cultural and religious issues receded. And one of the favorite things I've ever run across was a letter from a Missouri Democrat to Jim Farley, who was FDR's main political guy. And he was writing about prohibition and the fight at the time, the people who were for prohibition were called the Dries and the anti-prohibitionists were called the Wets. And this gentleman wrote Jim Farley, I don't know why the Wets and the Dries are arguing about alcohol when neither of them can afford the price of a drink. And so the Depression rolled back this kind of cultural politics. So that's happened to some degree, but not nearly to the degree that it happened after the Great Crash. You still have an organized religious conservative movement, which played a major role in the Republican primaries. I think it's worth noting that Mitt Romney did not win a primary where white evangelicals cast a majority of the votes until after he had secured his party's nomination. And I've always wanted to go back and check to make sure that was true up to a certain point in the primary. But in the very early primaries, it was very clear. Romney did quite well in states where evangelicals cast a minority of Republican ballots. He did much less well in states where they were in the majority. But you have not seen religious themes play out. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is on Mitt Romney's side, he is the first Mormon nominee. And by the way, whether even if you are the most ardent Democrat, it is remarkable and a sign of the triumph of American pluralism that this is the first time a ticket does not include a Protestant on it. I mean, I don't think of Mormons as Protestants. We can argue about that. They did come out of the Protestant tradition, but you have a ticket of a Mormon and a Catholic, and the only Protestant on it, I should have said white Protestant, because the only Protestant on either ticket is our first African-American president. That's really quite remarkable. And the debate this week was the first debate ever between two Catholics running for either president or vice president. So that whatever else you make of this election, it does confirm a kind of American openness and a kind of American pluralism that I think should, in some sense, be heartening for members of other religious minorities over the long haul of our history. But because of his Mormonism, Mitt Romney has been very reluctant to talk about religious issues in an explicit way. I think that's hobbled him early on. And I think you saw that at the Republican convention. But you probably didn't watch as much of it as I did. I was paid to watch a lot of it. You weren't. But I thought of either convention. But I thought one of the most powerful moments at that convention were the two friends, people that Romney helped when he was a bishop of his church. You know, in one case when their child was ill, and another case where he helped the family. And it painted a portrait of Mitt Romney that was one of the most attractive portraits of this man that you saw in the entire campaign. So I think he's paid a price for not wanting to talk about this very much. On the other hand, polling suggests that there might have been a cost to his religious, to him from his religious faith. I think it very much hurt him in the Iowa caucuses in 2008, where he was beaten soundly by Mike Huckabee. And on the Obama side, I think you've seen a couple of things happen. I think President Obama at Jim Wallis's call to renewal meeting in 2006 gave what I think is, and I have a lot of conservative friends who agree with this, so it's not a partisan statement, one of the single best statements about religion and American politics by a politician that we have heard in a very, very long time. It was very sophisticated. It was subtle. It tried to sort of attack prejudice against both religious people and against people who do not have religious faith. It was a remarkable document. If you haven't read it yet, I urge you all to take a look at it. So this was important to Obama, and I think after the 2004 elections, Democrats realizing that they had been hurt by John Kerry's difficulties in talking about religion, and just parenthetically, Kerry himself came to think this. I had a fascinating experience with Kerry where I learned that after the election, he spent months kind of at a monthly seminar with religious friends, people who taught at seminaries, just talking about religion, because it was actually something that mattered to him. I've been involved over the years with a group called the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, and we just invited Kerry about a year after the election to talk about his religious faith. And that, you could look at it online. It was a remarkable statement, and it was an extremely well thought through statement. And my first question, which I think I asked more politely than this, went something like, why couldn't you have said that about 3 or 4 months before the 2004 election? Because it was a really remarkable statement. But what Kerry learned was reflected in the party as a whole. And there was a lot of organizing done around religious issues by Democrats, liberals, progressives, and around religious constituencies. Then a couple of things happened. One is I've always thought that when it comes to religion, Barack Obama's hero might well be Job. Because no matter how he brought this issue up, it came back to slap him in the face. First, of course, it was said that Barack Obama was actually a secret Muslim. Now, as Colin Powell reminded us before the 2008 election, there's absolutely would be nothing wrong if he were a Muslim, but he happens not to be a Muslim. He happens to be a Christian. Then, with the Jeremiah Wright controversy, it turned out that in the eyes of his critics, well, he may be a Christian, but he's a wrong kind of Christian. You can't be a Jeremiah Wright Christian. And of course, there was the attack on Jeremiah Wright. And so I think the president developed a certain reticence, to put it diplomatically, perhaps, about talking about religion. And I think the party as a whole and progressives as a whole, with some notable exceptions like the gentleman sitting to my right and your left, really sort of figured out we did the job in 2008. We don't have to do much work in this area anymore. And I think Democrats, to a very large degree, have let some of this work go. There are people now trying at this late hour to sort of reorganize some of the groups, or organize new groups. And there are a few, again, there are other exceptions to that rule. The group Faith and Public Life has continued to do interesting work in this area on the progressive side. Nonetheless, I think there's been a pulling back. Nonetheless, I think you will, on election night, when you look at the exit polls, see some very clear religious alignments. Once again, white evangelicals will vote overwhelmingly for Mitt Romney. African Americans of all stripes will vote even more overwhelmingly for Barack Obama. Catholics, I always like to say, I'm Catholic of us, that there is no Catholic vote, and it's important, which is to say that Catholics are a classic swing group. We're a kind of a 40-40-20 group. It's very hard for Republicans to get less than 40% of the Catholic vote. It's very almost impossible for Democrats to get less than 40%, but there are about 20 of us who swing around, and I think that has to do with the class position of Catholics, with some Catholics being torn on the social justice and right to life issues. There are a lot of different reasons why Catholics are a swing group, but they are. My sense is Obama will carry the Catholic vote unless he gets absolutely clobbered in the election, because Latinos will constitute some very significant share of the Catholic vote, and President Obama looks to be carrying Latinos by margins better than 2-1, could end up approaching 3-1. And so we will have religious alignments, and I think, again, that President Obama will carry the Jewish vote by a very substantial margin. There may be some chipping away from his 78% from the last time. It's very hard to get 78% of most groups. But I think the test will be how much, if it goes down 3 or 4 points as opposed to 5, 6, 7 points. But I don't see a collapse of his share of the Jewish vote. So religion will be there.